Welcome back. I'm going to introduce the speakers for this panel, and then they will come up and give their presentations, and the question and answer time will be at the end. They'll all come back up together for the Q&A time. Okay, so Bettye Gardner is Professor Emerita of History at Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland. She is a past president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In her distinguished career, she has authored many publications and has received many honors for her scholarly work on African American history. David Ray Morris from New Orleans is an award-winning photographer and filmmaker. He worked with his late father, Willie Morris, on the book My Mississippi. His photographs are in many private and public collections, including the Mississippi Museum of Art. His award-winning films on school integration in Mississippi have been shown at festivals throughout the nation. He and Dr. Gardner will talk about Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister, a pioneering educator from Vicksburg. Dottie Quaye Chapman Reed is a native of Water Valley, Mississippi, who now lives in Georgia. She's retired from a career in education and corporate America. She has authored a book called Outstanding Black Women of Yalobusha County, which is right up here, about the lives of unsung Black women who have made significant contributions to their community and beyond. Roscoe Barnes is the Cultural Heritage and Tourism Manager at Visit Natchez. He serves on the board of the Mississippi Historical Society. Barnes is an author of several books, a newspaper columnist, minister, prison chaplain, scholar, award-winning journalist, and an artist. How do you have any free time? Today he'll talk about civil rights icon Anne Moody. So without further ado, our first speakers will come up.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. You can bring that light up a little bit. Seriously. Thank you. Well, the previous presentation by the students at the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State really kind of lay a foundation for what David and I will be discussing, and that's the phenomenal career of Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister, and our title, Columbia University Teachers College Hero, actually comes from a plaque proclamation, I guess I should say, that Columbia University did when we unveiled a marker in 2019 in Vicksburg, which was Dr. McAllister's home, for her. And she was phenomenal enough to them that they actually called her a Teachers College hero. So without further ado, I want to get into this because we're going to try, David and I, to capture the 50-plus year career of Dr. McAllister's within the allotted framework. I know there's a reception coming, so we'll try to do this in our time limit. So, Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister was born in 1899 in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to Flora and Richard McAllister, 3 years after the separate but equal doctrine became the law of the land. And her amazing career in education took place within the context of this doctrine. Her mother was a teacher and her father was a mail carrier, which made them a part of a small group of educated African Americans in Mississippi and the nation. Her mother actually graduated from Jackson College in 1891. Yes, there was a Jackson College then, and clearly had a great impact on her throughout her early life. She graduated from Cherry Street School, the first black high school in Vicksburg, in 1915, and entered Talladega College in Alabama where she graduated with honors in 1919 and began teaching at Southern University in Louisiana that summer. Realizing the need for a graduate degree, she earned an MA degree from the University of Michigan in 1921 in the first class to receive the Master of Arts degree. 5 years later, she decided to go to Columbia University Teachers College and graduated in 3 years in 1929 as the first African-American PhD student in education, the first in the nation, so a number of firsts. Mabel Carney, her advisor at Columbia, commented that the real history of American Negro education on the advanced level in Teachers College began with Jane Ellen McAllister's thesis on the training of Negro teachers in Louisiana. Based on her outstanding scholarship, Dr. McAllister was appointed a Dean's Scholar by Teachers College in 1949. Truly, she was an exceptional person for any time and any gender. Living within a world defined by white male power structure, she fought this power structure with a persistent spirit and challenged her students of each generation to overcome racial barriers as well. It was during her years in Louisiana that she came face to face with the deplorable educational situation for Black children. With the support of the Jeans Fund and the Rosenwald Fund, Jane Ellen became an agent of change in the training of Black teachers who would ultimately impact Black children. During the next 2 decades, Dr. McAllister shared her commitment to improve the quality of education at several historically Black colleges and universities, including her 21-year career and tenure at Minor Teachers College in Washington, D.C. She went there and served there as the chair of the Department of Education and established a reputation for academic excellence. Based on her work at Minor, she became a nationally recognized leader in education. In 1951, Jane McAllister came full circle, returning to Jackson State College, where she had shared her educational initiatives over the years. When she returned, she brought an arsenal of talents that she had developed over the years. Her dedication to uplifting the race was evident in everything that she did. Jacob Reddix, then president of Jackson State, encouraged her to revolutionize the college's educational offerings. As had been the case throughout her career, she challenged her students to excel because she believed that the educationally limiting environment in the South could be overcome through first-rate work. Over the years, she had never lost touch with Mississippi and Louisiana, returning during the summers to help with the training of teachers. During the decades that she returned in the 50s and the 60s, Jackson State became an academic showcase for her many talents. Among the programs which she initiated and directed were the following. And let me just pause for a moment to say that the exciting things that are going on at the Margaret Walker Center connect in an interesting kind of way, because some of what she did in the 50s and 60s without all of the technology would have been really fascinating to her. So there were programs which she initiated that included a student-sponsored forum, and even more interestingly, the tele-lecture series. So I'm sure nobody in this room, and certainly none of the young folks, can even imagine what the tele-lecture series was, but it was actually using telephones and doing these lectures or having people away from here to actually agree that they would, that they would do or be a participant in this tele-lecture series. She did a number of college enrichment summer programs for high school students, the town meeting on the air, and several NDEA institutes for teachers of disadvantaged youth. These various programs were intended to provide what she called a window on the world, introducing students to a variety of national leaders, several of whom came to the campus. Her access to national funding agencies, such as the Carnegie Foundation, led to Jackson State receiving some of its major funding in this period. Jane Ellen McAllister's philosophy of education was molded by W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of the talented tenth. Those who represented the upper tenth of the race, he wrote, were expected to be the leaders of thought and the missionaries of culture. Clearly, over all of the generations, all 5 decades, she saw herself as a leader of thought for her students. Henry Houston, a former student, commented on his experience with Dr. McAllister a few years ago. As a freshman entering Jackson College, I was very proud of being a member of the first honors class at the college. Our honors group of 15 or 20 students hailing from all over the state were specifically assigned to Dr. McAllister's Psychology 101 class. The administration, he said, wanted us to have the best. On the first day of class, all the honor students were in awe of Dr. McAllister's energy, sense of urgency, academic dedication, and the challenge she posed to us for excellence. Every day she brought to class a sense of excitement and expectation. It seemed that she thought our class was pretty sharp, and so she intended to push us to our limits. For example, the other freshman courses covered a core textbook for the year. The Psychology 101 class covered an entire textbook each quarter. I have never forgotten that class, he said. While delighted to have an opportunity to write these few lines, I wish most of all that these words adequately reflect my respect and admiration for one of the most influential individuals in my life. And as a follow-up to another comment that the students made in terms of the Margaret Walker Center, she and Dr. Walker and Dr. McAllister were both on the campus at the same time. So you can imagine what, what an exciting time that had to be. And I think that David has a picture somewhere in here of the two of them together on the campus. So this is certainly, as I said, a very sketchy attempt to kind of fit Dr. McAllister into this whole picture. And I will add one thing in terms of the Department of Archives and History. In 2017, Dr. McAllister's home, where she lived all of her life, almost a century, from 1899 to 1996, her home was made a landmark, historic landmark, in 2017, and in 2019 we erected a marker for her as well in front of her home, which honors her long career in higher education and, of course, in Mississippi in its earlier years and also in the 50s and 60s. And we hope at some point that we will be able to spotlight her career there in Vicksburg, at her home in Vicksburg, in terms of making it not so much a museum, but certainly an educational and a cultural center where we look at her life in that time frame through all of those decades and the impact that it had not only there in Vicksburg, but nationally. So thank you.
The life circumstances of the women of Yalobusha County featured in my newspaper column and in my book entitled Outstanding Black Women of Yalobusha, Their Stories and Contributions to the Mississippi Community, and the two women noted today, Ann Moody and Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister, were much the same, impeded and stifled by Mississippi's segregated society. The Jim Crow laws and unspoken Southern customs denied all Black women, including my grandmother, Jane Pritchard, born in 1871, the equal rights and many opportunities that we now take for granted. I'm going to show you a picture of my grandmother. She is sitting with several unknown women, and they are featured on the cover of my book. Each of them have on their church hats, as you can see, and they're standing on the steps of the courthouse in Water Valley, Mississippi, holding bags. The contents are unknown, and their purpose is unknown, leaving us to wonder about that moment. It is my hope that one day we'll identify the other women and their purpose and mission. Someone suggested that this might have been part of a washerwoman's protest in the early 1900s. My grandmother appears to be in her 20s at the time. I'm going to really talk a little bit about my journey in terms of the articles that I published in the North Mississippi Herald, which led to a book which was published in December 2020. Dr. Jane Ellen McAllister, as you just heard, became the first Black woman to earn a PhD in education and blaze trails in academia. Ann Moody, as you will hear, became a distinguished author and activist. I remember reading her book when I was a freshman at the University of Mississippi in 1970, and I was inspired. The Black women of Yalobusha County did not achieve this kind of public acclaim, yet like Moody and McAllister, they forged ahead in the same restrictive Mississippi climate to make profound contributions to family and community that were so often unheralded. I'm moving to slide 4. So my goal, basically, and the goal of my project is to redress this oversight with examples of their leadership, most often evident in the civic and religious organizations central to Yalobusha County's Black community. Take the life of Annie Kelly Montgomery, for instance, who burnished her teaching credentials at 3 historically Black colleges so she could better mentor Yalobusha County children, both in regular school and in Sunday school. Aside from being my Sunday school superintendent at Miles Memorial CME Church in Water Valley, she became nationally known in the CME, in the Christian Methodist Church, and is recognized to this day for developing and designing what she called the missionary hand. It still serves as a guide for CME women in ministry, and it stands for giving, working, talking, studying, and praying. All of this in addition to her work as a gene supervisor, which you heard Ms. Gardner mention a few minutes ago. In Yalobusha County, she was a gene supervisor for 20 years. These supervisors worked with educators in their counties, and they to help the teachers and the students. The fund that they used was developed by a woman named Anna Jeans. She was a white philanthropist and a Quaker from Pennsylvania who worked with Booker T. Washington. From her office on Main Street in Water Valley, she oversaw the growth and development of Black schools and personnel in the county. Or I could tell you about Miss Mabel Hervey, who was a pillar of her church, using her cooking and canning skills to minister to the needy, and whose commitment to education inspired her daughter, Annette, to integrate Water Valley High School in 1966. The courage it must have taken for her mother and her family to allow her to go to the white school. And it was just a few years earlier that Miss Maybertha Carter, a sharecropper and mother of 16, kept her promise to her children that they would not have to pick cotton, that they would get the education that she had been denied. The Carter children would be the first to integrate the schools in Drew, Mississippi, Archie Manning's hometown. They experienced gunshots in the middle of the night, and they were evicted from their home, but they persevered. The Carter children endured all kinds of harassment, but went on to obtain their college degrees and successful careers. I was honored to have met Miss Maybertha, and I attended college with 4 of the Carter children. Or I could mention Miss Lily Mae Caldwell, who turned 92 last August, and she's the first known Black to register to vote in Yalobusha County. She said there might have been others who registered before her, but they were afraid to say so. However, the story of Miss Ruby Doris Hall, one of Water Valley's most favorite school teachers, is closest to my heart. When she was featured in my column, I received the following from a former white male student when he discovered the article in the paper. He wrote, "It made me smile when I opened it up and saw Mrs. Hall's picture. The wonderful picture you portrayed of what a fine woman she was and what a positive influence she made on so many lives was understated. In fact, I don't know if there are words that could do it justice." He went on to say, "I was occasionally in their home. Their family always impressed me so, particularly given the times we were living in. As you know, their mother, Mrs. Hall, cared for everyone. Care is all I ever felt for her. I have thought of her so many times, of things she said and her demeanor and attitude. She was surely a beacon of light. I consider Mrs. Hall one of the most influential people in my younger years, and as you know, those are the people who mold you into what you become as an adult. I noticed your bio said that you were sharing information about women in the county that have made an impact on the African American community. Rest assured, Mrs. Hall's impact was much more far-reaching than the African American community. I can testify to that." This gentleman was in Ms. Hall's 5th grade class. Then her daughter, Natasha, wrote that Mama's strength was also evident in the example she set by supporting rather than emasculating my daddy as he unsuccessfully fought the state of Mississippi several times for disability benefits after the accident that rendered him unable to work as a mechanic. As a young girl around 7 or 8 years old, I remember making the trek to Jackson, Mississippi with my parents as they fought this fight together. Although each denial by the state took something out of them, it also reinforced their resolve to make ends meet for their family no matter what. Both of the Halls passed away in the early 50s. However, their impact on the Yalobusha community was widespread. And you see they had 7 children, and she taught 5th and 6th grade math for 37 years, started teaching when she was 21, and just an outstanding woman. It's stories like these that made a difference and can continue to make a difference if documented and shared. There are thousands of stories like these in our Mississippi communities that should be told. Aside from the 45 stories published in my book, an oral history project developed through the collaboration with the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi. Graduate students conducted oral history interviews of Black families in Yalobusha County, and those powerful and intriguing interviews are posted on a university repository website. The women on the front row are featured in the book, and were featured in my columns, and most of those on the back row are the students, and on the end is Dr. Jesse Wilkerson, who orchestrated, organized the entire project. And I must take a minute to thank Dr. Catherine McKee, who is in the audience today, for that opportunity. The people in Mississippi, especially the Black community, have been so long excluded from these types of opportunities and institutions, deserve more. Many of these small communities here in Mississippi are dying a slow death, hospitals closing, subpar education, no clean water, a lack of internet access, food deserts. Perhaps a duplication of such projects could open doors for better communication, greater understanding of our differences, and resolve some of these issues. I believe that we can do that by telling our stories, documenting our stories, and sharing them with the world, one community at a time. As Dr. Henry Louis Gates said, because there is no American history without the story of Black people who helped to create it. So I, like him, as he goes on to say, am very much concerned with integrating the African American story into the American story, and the American story into the African American story. Thank you very much.
And leaving her home state of Mississippi, and for many years she stayed away. She did not return, even when her mother became ill in 1976. Anne was afraid to come home during that time. She eventually came home during her later years, but when she came, she appeared to be broken by years of suffering from her time in the civil rights movement. And I probably should have changed that before I got started. You think that's a good idea? I think that helps a little. But she suffered a lot during the movement. And when she came home, she was broken. She had a lot of mental issues. She had suffered tremendously during the 60s. And later in her life, she had a mental breakdown, and she required assistance in a mental institution. She also suffered from dementia, and she died in 2015 at the age of 74. During the time that she was away, Jackie Robinson wrote a column about her, and he said that she could not go home. And that was because of the threats that she had received, threats from the Klan and threats from others who opposed the civil rights movement. And the image you see on the right is her house as it looks today in Centerville, the house that she writes about in Coming of Age, that her stepdad helped to build. This paper addresses the issue of commemoration as it relates to Moody's contributions as a civil rights pioneer, and to welcome her home, so to speak. Specifically, it discusses the process and the strategy that was used to honor Moody in Southwest Mississippi by employing principles of journalism and public history. The commemoration work shared in this presentation was done by the Ann Moody History Project, which was made up of volunteer staff members of the Wilkinson County Correctional Facility who were assisted by the facility's inmates. I am the founding chairman of the project. When we formed in 2017, Our overriding aim was to keep Anne Moody's legacy alive. At the time, she was not widely known or being discussed, especially in her hometown of Centerville. However, we wanted to bring her home by reviving her legacy and making her name known to today's generation. Today, I want to talk about our efforts and what we achieved in our goal to commemorate this important author and civil rights pioneer. First, I will discuss our decision to honor her. Next, I will talk about our plans for honoring her. Then, finally, I will speak about the results of honoring her. What prompted us to pursue this project? What gave us the idea that something could be done? There were several factors, but I will focus on two of them. First, it was the omission of her name in Black history programs. This was something we noticed in many places, inside our prison, in local schools. We found that year after year during Black History Month, we saw the same names, the same people being honored, the same people being recognized. But we thought it was a shame that right there in Centerville, the town that she wrote about in that classic memoir, nobody knew who she was. We went around to other schools, we visited, and we saw the posters, the pictures, the same photos. We saw Dr. Martin Luther King, we saw Rosa Parks, we saw Malcolm, the same ones every year. But we did not see anything about Anne Moody. The second reason we decided to do something was because we felt compelled to promote her legacy, because there was no recognition of her in her hometown and only a little recognition in Woodville. Woodville is home to an African American museum, and that museum has a small exhibit on Anne Moody. It doesn't tell you very much. It has a portrait, a typewriter, and copies of her book, and a poster, I might add. But things changed in the spring of 2017. I was working as chaplain at the Woodville prison when I walked in on a conversation that was being held between my colleagues, Emma Taplin, Laverne Taylor. They were talking about Anne Moody, so my ears perked up. I said, okay, what's going on? They were talking about her contributions to the civil rights movement and her sacrifices in the fight for freedom and justice for all people. They also noted with serious concern that she had not received the recognition that she deserved. Then, almost in unison, they said, we need to do something. We need to do our part to honor this woman's legacy. We need to tell her story. We later spoke to our colleague, Ruby Dixon, and she agreed that we must act and not wait. Yes, we felt the need to do something, but what? What exactly could we do, and where could we start? What impact would we have? Those were the questions that we asked ourselves. We would find our answers during a period of brainstorming. Ideas for honoring Anne Moody came to us in the spring of 2017 after a weekend of deep thought and many discussions. During this process, we created a blueprint for promotion that outlined practical steps we could take to launch an effective public relations campaign. Yes, we had lofty dreams about the project, but we wanted to be realistic. We wanted to keep it real. Our early efforts focused on the name and the slogan for our endeavor. We wanted a name that had a ring of authenticity and a slogan that was clear, simple, and direct. One that was easy to say and easy to remember. After some discussions, we chose the official name, the Ann Moody History Project. Somebody told me during that time that, it sounds like it's legit. I said, yeah, that's the purpose. We want to sound like we're legit. We described it as a community service endeavor to promote and help preserve the legacy of Ann Moody. And we agreed that our mission would be to simply keep her legacy alive. And that statement became our slogan, keeping her legacy alive. In terms of special programs, we started where we were. We started inside the prison. We created a book club where the inmates could read and discuss coming of age in Mississippi. In April 2017, Ann Moody's brother, Fred, the one that's mentioned throughout the book, he came to the prison and he met with these inmates who read the book. He took photos with them and signed copies of the book, and they were like little children. Fred Moody, that they've been reading about and discussing, he comes to the prison. And this young man on the left, Glenn Conley, I have more to say about him later. He was the facilitator for the reading. He absolutely fell in love with Ann Moody's book, and he said one day he's going to become an Ann Moody scholar. And like I say, I have more to say about him. To capture the attention of the news media, we created special events throughout the year that told the story of Ann Moody. In press releases, blog posts, social media, we highlighted our prison connection. This gave our story an interesting twist. Think about it. How often do you hear of a maximum security prison doing research on the civil rights movement? We figured that would catch the attention of the news media. And we emphasized it. Yes, we played it. We played it up, I confess. Hey, if it works, do it. So reporters would call us and say, so is it true that this is being done in the prison? Yes, it is. No university is involved? No university. But this is the prison where we hear about gang violence and we hear about, she went on and on. I said, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? But they went on with the coverage. But I'm happy to report that the success of our efforts exceeded our expectations. A few more images. This is in her hometown of Centerville. This is her brother Ralph here on the left, her son Sasha, Adeline, and Fred. Her siblings are all mentioned in her book. And that's the street sign, and that's an article that appeared in the Natchez Democrat. This is a portrait that got a lot of recognition. And the one on the right is the one that caught the attention of Joan Trumpara Mulholland. She saw the photo of the Woolworth sit-in right here, and she called and asked me if she could come to our prison. She wants to meet the man that drew that picture. And you see some work done by some of the other inmates on the right. Let's talk about the results. The news media in general and the Associated Press in particular played a significant role in our coverage, beginning with our first event, which occurred on September the 15th, 2017. That was Ann Moody's birthday, and the Centerville Board of Aldermen had approved our request to proclaim her birthday Ann Moody Day. The board also approved a resolution to rename Fort Street, the street where she grew up, Ann Moody Street. Our celebration on this day drew local and regional reporters, including the Associated Press. The AP placed a story on the National Wire, and the next day we saw it in the Washington Post and in papers across the United States. We were blown away. We had no idea that this project would take off the way that it did. We were all surprised. We were thrilled beyond belief, but little did we know this was just the beginning. From 2017 onward, we saw increased media coverage, with our news receiving national coverage around 5 or 6 times. We received emails and phone calls from students and professors. Many reached out to us through social media platforms such as Twitter. In addition to academic professionals, we received visits by authors, photographers, and filmmakers. One day I got a call from the office of Nancy Pelosi. Have you ever heard of her? Yeah, someone working with in her history department contacted us, and they needed our help because they wanted to include Anne Moody on their calendar that they had for the lawmakers. And of course, I could not, what is, yeah, I was the little kid in the candy store, but that was fun. That was a surprise. But before closing, I want to mention 4 important highlights from our campaign. And the first highlight has to do with the naming of a portion of Highway 24, the Anne Moody Memorial Highway. On the left, that was during the ceremony when we unveiled the sign, and there you see her family members, her siblings, and her son Sasha on the right. That was an event that also included participation and attendance by the local high school, Wilkinson County High School. The second highlight was the day that we received a visit by officials of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. As they were walking through the door, they said, "We have never been inside of a prison." And I said, "Well, are you aware of any other prisons doing this kind of work, doing this kind of research?" They said, "No, never heard of anything like this." But they spent the afternoon with us, and yes, we fed them. We gave a presentation, and then we donated some of the items that we had to MDAH. That was an important highlight for us. We also put them in touch with Adeline, Anne Moody's sister, and they visited Adeline before they arrived at the prison. That was a great day. Third highlight was the visit by civil rights pioneer Joan Trump-Auer Mulholland. She became interested in our work, as I mentioned earlier, when she saw the detailed drawing of the famous Woolworth sit-in done by an inmate at our facility. And when she came, Reverend Ed King also came that day. He was here this morning. I was happy to see him, but he came. And before she came to the prison, that morning around 9 o'clock, we first went to the Wilkinson County High School. She insisted on spending time with students. She wanted the young people to hear her story. We went to the high school gym, and the entire high school showed up. Teachers, students, over 300 people were there, and the students fell in love with her. She signed autographs. It was a great experience for them. They just loved her. And there you see on the right, she's looking at that artwork that was done by the inmate. And yes, she did get to meet him. We brought him out to meet her, and she gave him a big hug, and he was all tears. He could not stop crying. He could not believe that someone like this would recognize his work. So that was a special day. And next, finally, this is the 4th highlight. This is the achievement of an inmate who dreamed of becoming an Anne Moody Scholar. His name is Glenn Conley II. On April the 23rd, 2021, he presented an academic paper on Anne Moody at the 53rd annual conference held by the Western Association of Women Historians. That was a first for the state of Mississippi and the Mississippi Department of Corrections. No inmate had ever presented from prison an academic paper using a platform that was similar to Zoom. But he did. He did. And that was one of his dreams. And he is now working to have an article published in a peer-reviewed journal. He's finishing up his master's with plans to pursue a PhD. And guess what he wants his topic to be? Anne Moody. He told me before I left the prison, and he said, "Hey, Chap," he said, "one of these days," he said, "when people talk about Anne Moody, they're going to talk about Glenn Conley. I don't want them to talk about Anne Moody without mentioning my name." I said, "Hey, go for it, man." And there's a professor, Leanne Wheeler, from Binghamton University, has been working with him, and she made it possible for this presentation. Okay, I'm getting ready to close. Now, as you can imagine, we were more than pleased with these results. Even though we started out with minimal resources and no reputation in the academic community, we were able to raise awareness about Moody and her contributions to the civil rights movement. In closing, I want to note that over the last few years, our work on Ann Moody has been cited in peer-reviewed journals, and for that we are grateful. We have served as a facilitator and catalyst for students and scholars alike who are interested in Ann Moody. As noted earlier, our aim was to bring her home. This presentation has shown how the Ann Moody History Project engaged in public history to promote her legacy. It accomplished this mission by relentless marketing and promotion, special programs, writing for print and digital media, the creative talents of prison staff and inmate population, and community support. And it is my belief that the steps taken during the promotion of this project may be replicated in other communities to help preserve and promote the legacy of other important figures in history. Thank you very much.